welcome back to our little mini series on aggregate demand. This is the last of 5 videos based on aggregate demand. Make sure you use them in order, okay? Work through it. There's an intro, okay? There's a video on consumption, one on investment, one on government spending, and one on net exports, okay? Today we're going to focus specifically on net exports, okay? Now then, this is the only part of aggregate demand where there is some mathematics potentially involved, okay? So think about this. You've got the revenue from exports, take away the spending on imports. That is why it's called net exports, okay? So we are taking into account the fact that a country, an economy, receives revenue when it sells products to other economies, okay? We also consider that when a country buys products from another economy, it is actually spending money and sending that money to another economy. Okay, so let's think about that. That is X minus M. Okay, and that is revenue from exports, take away spending on imports. That gives us a net figure. Don't forget, that could be a negative figure. If you're spending more on imports than you're exporting, that figure is going to actually be a negative figure in that aggregate demand scenario. Okay? Don't be confused by this. Plus, minus, that's fine. This is why this is in brackets. This is a separate calculation, and then you work out whether it's a figure that's negative or a figure that's positive. Okay? Different economies will have different net exports. So I'll give you an example. Somewhere like Saudi Arabia, they export much more than they import. Okay, they import everything except for oil, but they export so much oil that they're actually receiving higher revenues from their exports than they are from their imports. So that would be a positive figure. Okay, a country like the UK, we import more than we export in the UK. So this figure here might be a negative figure in the UK economy. Okay, if there's a balance of trade deficit, we'll come on to that when we do something like balance of payments in a little while. In fact, you've already got a series on the balance of payments that you can refer back to and check if you're not certain. So think about this. There are 5 main factors that might impact on the level of net exports in a country. So the first thing is this: real incomes. Okay, now we should understand the word incomes. That's fine, isn't it? That's perfectly easy. So you do a job, you get a wage. You do a job, you get a salary. You invest something, you might get a return on investment. But what we're saying actually is real incomes. Okay. So what is that word real there for? Well, the word real, if it comes before any phrase, then it's taken into account inflation. So imagine that my salary increases by 5%. Okay, that is not a real increase, because if average price levels in the economy increase by 10%, then actually my salary's fallen in real terms. So we have to take into account inflation when we're considering this particular concept. Think about it. Okay, now in that sense, if real incomes are increasing, then what happens? Well, studies show that as people's incomes increase, they are much more likely to import products. Okay? Imported products are often seen as something different, something luxurious, something which you might be able to afford as your incomes increase. So we are much more likely to import goods if our incomes are increasing. Okay? If incomes are decreasing, then what we'll see is less import spending. Okay, so this figure here would fall, which would have an effect on our net export level. Okay, so next we've got exchange rates. Now, first of all, make sure you're comfortable with the definition of exchange rates. The exchange rates is simply the value of a currency as expressed in another currency. Okay, so do get your head around that. Okay, it's only 1 to 1. So you compare the value of the euro against the dollar, or the value of the euro against the pound, or the value of the yen against the Australian dollar. Okay, so you're only considering one ratio at that point. Okay, now let's have a think about this. If your currency gets stronger, okay, if your currency appreciates in value, what does that mean? It means that you can afford more imports. Okay, but it also means that your exports become relatively more expensive. Okay, and that will change this situation. So let's just go through that once more. Okay, if your exchange rates strengthen, what does that mean in terms of imports and exports? So a stronger currency means more. Can't write. More import spending. Stronger currency leads to more import spending. However, stronger currency leads to less export revenues. Okay, so think about it. More import spending, less export revenues. Now, the opposite is also true. So if your currency weakens, okay, what is going to happen to this? Well, actually, if your currency is weakening, it means you have to spend more of it to buy foreign products. Okay, so just think that through. If your currency is weakening, you have to spend more of it in order to buy foreign goods. That means that you have less imports. But on the plus side, if your currency is relatively weak, that's an important word, relatively. If your currency is relatively weak, then actually this will encourage foreign economies to buy the things that you are selling. Okay, so consider this. This is starting to get a little bit convoluted in here, isn't it? But think about when you're writing longer answer responses. All of this information, definition here, understanding what happens when it strengthens, understanding what happens when it weakens, all of this is valuable marks for when you are writing a story or writing an essay. Okay, so think about that in terms of what does that mean for aggregate demand. Okay, don't forget export revenues, import spending. Next, the global economy. Now, the global economy is where we take all of our macroeconomic economies and we add them all together and we consider what is the state of the overall economic progress around the world. Okay, obviously we're looking for economic growth. We're looking for changes in globalization. We're looking for economies that are growing faster, or are economies shrinking? Is there some form of global economic crisis as there is today? Think about the fact that if the global economy is thriving, if there is confidence, if there is growth, then we'll see a lot more trade. Okay, so trade means that we're going to have a difference here in terms of exports and imports. If, however, if there is very low economic growth around the world, if economies are shrinking, if there is a lack of confidence in the global outlook, then we will see a lot less trade. Okay, and the amount of exports from a country will probably start to fall. The amount of imports will maybe start to fall as well. Of course, it depends what you're importing and exporting. Okay, so for example, you have to consider the price elasticity of demand, and the price elasticity of supply for your imports and exports. Okay? If those phrases confuse you, price elasticity of demand, price elasticity of supply, then go back, check the content for your understanding. If you have price inelastic imports, if you are importing food, if you're importing oil, then those things you're still going to have to import, even if the prices rise, even if confidence is low. Think about the products that you export as a country. If you are exporting things which are price inelastic, that means people will still buy them even if the price goes up, then it's not going to have such an impact. Okay. Next, the degree of protectionism. Okay. Now, this word protectionism is, well, let's break it down. If I want to protect something, I am going to try to make sure that it doesn't get damaged, right? I'm going to make sure that it stays fit and healthy and strong. I'm going to protect something. So, what is being protected? Domestic industries. A government will help its own companies by providing them with some form of protection. Okay. Now, we've got different types of protection. Okay. And we'll come on to look at that. Actually, that's part of our second year course, but I'll just introduce them quickly to you. A tariff, subsidy, should have heard of that already, and things like quotas. So what are we actually saying here? Well, a government can step in and it can say, hang on a second, we do not want as many imports. I am going to protect my own companies that are in this country. Okay? It's often things like agriculture, defense spending, declining industries like the coal industry, the steel industry. Sometimes it's things like airlines, the banking sector. Governments want to protect those kinds of industries. Okay, now think about this. If protectionism is high, then what you're doing is you are restricting imports. Okay, if you use subsidies, you are encouraging exports. Okay, so this will have a direct impact on the level of your net exports. Okay, and lastly, non-price factors. Right, it is not just the price of imports or the price of exports that will affect the demand for those goods. This could be a marketing thing, so it could be all about the brand names. It could be a project to buy British or make America great again or keep America great again. So it could be all of these different nationalistic concepts where you discourage your consumers from buying foreign goods. Okay? Or it could be a policy from a government which says, let's try and encourage trade deals, let's try and export as many goods as we can. Okay? Which is the biggest economy that people are trying to break into at the moment? China. Okay? And you've got lots of different countries with projects to try to encourage exports to that economy. Okay, so think about this. I'm not going to do the diagram again, but what you want to think about is this. If your net exports change, that will have a direct impact on aggregate demand. The impact on aggregate demand will be to either shift it to the left or shift it to the right. And that will impact on output, that will impact on inflation, average prices. Okay? All right, we're moving on. Stay tuned.